Again, welcome and thank you so much for joining us for this very important topic this evening. Our presenter, Amy Carpenter, is an author and she will be discussing a book, Be Strong, Be Wise. It is a young adult's guide to sexual assault awareness and personal safety. She has developed a program that complements the book. She's a psychotherapist, a former youth worker, a writer, and a life coach, and she draws on 25 years of experience. She designed the safety program using the methods described in her book, along with the wisdom that she's gained from her own life as a parent and a survivor. Carpenter has previously written 2 books, Glenstone, a middle grade novel, and Channel Crossing, a parenting book. Her articles have appeared in Psych Central, the Asana International Yoga Journal, and 3ho.org, where she's a contributing blogger. In 2018, Carpenter was named the Maine Writers and Publishers Alliance Engelfritz Scholar for Writers of Nonfiction. She lives in Rockport, Maine with her husband and daughter, and you can find out more about her at amycarpenter.net or bestrongbewise.com. And with that, I turn the program over to Amy Carpenter. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much, Julia. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk with everyone, and I appreciate all of the tech support that Julia has offered this evening. So I want to start by saying that we are all on the same page here in joining in this discussion because all of us care about young people. So there's an opportunity to have a conversation where we're looking at things from kind of a similar vantage point, whether we're a parent or a counselor or a teacher or a youth worker. All of us care about the young people in our lives. And there's a lot of struggle that young people are going through right now that's, pretty concerning. So we know that the Me Too movement happened, which was super important, and it broke down the walls of secrecy and allowed people to have conversations around sexual assault and sexual assault awareness. It allowed survivors to come forward and share their story. And really, it began to turn the tables culturally around how we look at sexual safety. Because young adults are more likely to be victimized by sexual assault, they've had this whole new opportunity to understand their relationships as a result of the Me Too movement. However, we haven't come far enough, I would argue, in being able to respond effectively to this issue in a way that helps keep young people safe. So we know there's a problem. People are talking about this problem. There's a lot of effort happening at the high school and college level through Title IX organizations, and through various orientation practices that help equip young people to look at relationships a little bit differently. However, more than any other time, I would say that young people are living in an age of great duplicity, massive duplicity, because they know that the Me Too movement happened. They know, almost every young person knows somebody who has been assaulted. It could be somebody they heard about in the news. It could be a friend of a friend at school. But most young people are familiar enough with this phenomena at a somewhat personal level. So here's all this awareness. At the same time, pornography and hookup culture is happening for young people far more than it ever did before. So in researching my book, I was able to find out a lot about the effects of pornography, which actually there's every day 68 million views currently. Most young people, especially young men, have had experience engaging with pornography. So if we were to suspend judgment for a second and look at, take off the table right or wrong or anything like that, if we look at the content of pornography, that's when we start to understand things differently from a young person's perspective. 88% of pornography contains violence against women. And when you begin to look at what young people are navigating in their relationships, which is much less about dating and much more about hooking up, There's a lot of mixed messages around how do we behave? For a young woman, am I supposed to be demure and sweet and nice? Am I supposed to be seductive and provocative? Is a young man supposed to be, aggressive and have a lot of sexual prowess? Or are they supposed to be the friendly good guy? So these are all the mixed messages that young people navigate anyway. But in our current society and on the heels of the Me Too movement, and given the effects of pornography on youth culture, I would say this duplicity is having some really pretty disturbing effects. Just as a side note, I want to encourage viewers to check out Peggy Orenstein's books. She came out with Girls and Sex a few years ago. It's a New York Times bestseller. And she recently came out with Boys and Sex. And it's pretty disturbing reading as far as exactly what I'm talking about, what young people are living with in this duplicity and in trying to navigate the social landscape. But what I was surprised to read again and again and again is how very much young people actually want to talk about this. They want to have a constructive conversation with adults. Sex education is only required in 25 states currently. And we know that sex education can be wildly distorted as far as whether you're really getting to the nuts and bolts of the kinds of issues that young people are facing in their dating relationships. So it was really curious for me to hear that actually this is something they want to talk about. And when I've run the safety ed programs at the high school, and I recently taught a group of faculty and dean of students and RAs and chief of police at the college level, there was a similar reaction where, the young people, for example, were wanting to have more discussion, wanting to have more classes so that they could have an opportunity to talk about this. One of the challenges in doing this is that, frankly, this is an uncomfortable topic. It creates fear, it creates avoidance. It's still a taboo subject in our culture, even though Me Too happened and we know a lot more than we did before. It's still a really hard thing to talk about, and people tend to shy away from it. And I will share that I know this from my own personal experience, because I thought that I had really equipped my daughter, who's now at college, but she's now 19. And here I was, a psychotherapist, responding to and treating trauma for 20 plus years, studied trauma in grad school, was a child welfare social worker, and had done extensive training with Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote The Body Keeps the Score. I still struggled with how to talk to my child about sexual safety and sexual assault awareness for the very same reasons I'm describing here. So it wasn't until she experienced an assault in February of 2019 where I began to see things differently. And I realized that I'd been focusing on one half of the equation for the entire course of my career, because I had been responding to assault all that time. And after that event in 2019, and now she's allowed me to talk about it and has been one of my greatest supporters in bringing this information forward, and her stories in my book. So she's encouraging people to learn about it. But that's when I realized that we don't have enough focused on prevention. I did a Google search. I tried to find books and resources, and what I found fell far short of the mark of actually meeting young people where they're at and having a comprehensive, down-to-earth conversation. Mostly what I found were bullet points, to-do lists, much like you would see in a homework assignment or a text manual. So I kind of made it my mission at that point to begin to look at what could I offer from my experience, what could I offer from my role as a psychotherapist, but also as a youth worker and as a parent, that could help young people learn about this issue in a way that doesn't create more fear, but actually creates personal empowerment. So that's how the book began. And as Julia pointed out, there was the safety education program launched pretty much simultaneously to the release of the book. And the whole focus of the program is about helping the individual young person develop the internal wisdom, the internal strength to recognize, for example, what their gut instinct is telling them in a given moment, understanding how their autonomic nervous system functions, understanding their communication style in response to, a trigger or a situation where there's a little bit of an unsettling scenario happening, and really encouraging each young person going through the program to learn who they are and how they function in relationships. And what I've seen is, again, more of what I mentioned earlier around this kind of internal confusion, depending on, for example, a girl's perspective or a boy's perspective. And we've also looked at issues of homophobia and discrimination. So for folks who identify as non-binary, there's actually much greater risk because of discrimination. And when you bring race into the discussion, there's even greater concern. Women of color are much more at risk for sexual assault than Caucasian women. So this, I would argue is a situation that, we have nothing but opportunity here in talking about this in a productive, constructive way. So I want to kind of talk a little bit about the program and some specifics, because I want to offer parents some tools that they can use at home and that you can bring to the dinner table in family discussion. Because it's hard to broach the subject if you're just trying to kind of start a conversation at home, but there are actually some ways to do it that don't feel quite as awkward and overwhelming. One of the things that I encourage folks to do is to begin with the definition of sexual assault. It's surprising how many young people still equate sexual assault with rape, or with walking down a dark street at night and a stranger jumping out at you from an alleyway. So we know that the legal definition of sexual assault is much broader than that and encompasses a lot of other inappropriate touch that young people don't necessarily know, that is actually illegal, and how they can begin to identify in the moment what unwanted sexual touch is to them. So a great starting point for families is to, literally look up the legal definition and look up to begin talk about those three important words, unwanted sexual touch, and create a conversation around it. This is where parents, if they are comfortable, can talk about their own history and experiences with, a time where they felt uncomfortable and what they did about it. And again, using discretion as to what is appropriate to talk about with a young person. But, frankly, young people are much more resilient and much more capable of these hard conversations than we give them credit for. And frankly, they're exposed to so much on social media. It's almost odd not to have the conversation, because they're getting all of this, flooding of, music lyrics and YouTube videos and social media streams and pornography and all of that. But adults are having a hard time figuring out, well, what do we do about that and how do we talk about it? So that's a possible beginning point, is to talk about the definition. You can look at unwanted touch versus unwanted sexual touch, because you begin to develop and help your young person develop what it feels like to receive an advance, whether it's unwanted touch or unwanted sexual touch. It's going to feel very different if it's unwanted sexual touch. And it's a good thing for a young person to begin to identify what that feels like, so that in the moment they can recognize, okay, I'm having that feeling. What do I need to do about this to keep myself safe and to keep my boundaries in place? So that's when, you can talk about communication. How do you manage an uncomfortable situation? Whether a young person is prone to fight, flight, or freeze. And that's a really important conversation to have. Young people don't necessarily have the executive functioning for that kind of reflective awareness. Some people do. There are young people that know very well, like, I'm a freeze person, but not everybody does. So I call it kind of jump-starting the frontal lobe, which is not a great way of describing it, but it's kind of what we're doing in having these conversations. We're asking young people to look at themselves, look at how they respond to unpleasant, triggering stimuli, and what they want to begin to do differently. And the more that we have those kind of conversations, the more that we help them look at what is happening in dominant culture and what they want to align with, what they want to separate themselves out from. And then, of course, there's a lot that can happen from there, because once the conversation takes place at home, there's the opportunity for them to talk to their friends about it. There's the opportunity for allegiance to develop, or, to kind of create a common language and a common understanding among friends around, okay, how do we as a power group, that's what I call it in my book, how do we as a power group want to support each other in managing that frat party we're going to on Saturday night? So that, this is just these different steps in the progression, in the curriculum of understanding, the broader perspective, for example, gender and culture, and then narrowing the scope to look at peer relationships. And that's where we talk about power groups. I call it herd consciousness or power group. It's kind of working your herd. It's understanding how you're going to support each other as young people. And then in the Golden Key chapter, the Golden Key class, we take all of that broad understanding and we apply it to self-knowledge and helping each individual student understand how their brain works, how their communication style works, and how they can begin to look at safety and relationships. So we bring in our 5 safety tools in that Golden Key class, and we talk about communication and common sense, gut instinct, being able to understand and navigate boundaries. All of that comes into that Golden Key self-knowledge class. And then in our final class, we support young people in applying that wisdom to their relationships. So we look at both platonic and romantic. And it's amazing in the classes, the students really want to talk about, the experiences they've had, or I heard, somebody told me that this happened to them, or, I was at a party and I noticed that, somebody was getting really intoxicated and was coming on to one of our friends and we didn't know what to do. And this is all the type of thing that young people are navigating, certainly much more when they head off to college. So I really, I can't emphasize enough that having conversations at home, being able to create a safe place without judgment, where it's not about right or wrong, it's about helping young people learn who they are and how they want to be as they come into adulthood. One of the things I say a lot in the program is that you don't have to miss any fun in order to be safe. And I think that's a really important, reminder to young people when you're having this conversation, because they don't want to be restricted. Certainly, they don't want to lose any aspect of their independence. They want to be able to, have fun and be free and go to parties and, maybe drink and do the things that young people do. So in our program, we kind of do a lot of suspending judgment around, outside, of course, of the very black and white issue of sexual assault. But outside of that more clear territory, we really try and create a safe place for people to look at what they're living with on a daily basis, and and what's concerning for them. What do they feel afraid of or worried about? It's interesting in talking to folks, because I've tried to have a lot of conversations with Title IX officers and counselors, and youth workers, anybody that I can talk to who's working with young people. And it's interesting to learn that some people are not afraid at all that sexual assault will happen to them. It's kind of like out there and it's somebody else's problem, and that's not going to be what happens to me. Other people are afraid to walk across their college campus. So, this is something that is being talked about a lot now on the heels of the Me Too movement. Lots of articles are being written. So again, it's, I think, a product of that duplicity I spoke about earlier, where there's a ton of awareness of the issue, but not enough productive conversation about it. So, I just want to invite people to check out the book. I'm happy to have conversations around the program and answer any questions. These are just some ideas for what you can do at home for beginning these hard conversations. And just kind of practicing, what is it like to talk about this stuff? What is it like for young people to be exposed to pornography, or to have the guys that they know, if it's a young woman we're talking about, and the guys that they know, or maybe, they're aware that pornography is being used and it's affecting maybe the language used in a group situation. How do young women feel about that? How do young men feel about that? And there's a lot of honest, candid response when the question is asked, again, from a place of kind of suspended judgment. So again, I just invite people to bring this forward. I think the time is ripe. I think that young people are ready, and I'm excited to begin this next phase of the Be Strong, Be Wise progress, because we're working now on our training for trainers. So I'm writing book 2 currently. And as I said, the program has already taken place at the college level. So I'm excited to continue to offer it to parents and teachers and counselors, so that they have the curriculum and they can bring it to their students and the young people that they care about. So I appreciate your time today, and thank you so much to the Camden Public Library for making it possible. And I look forward to hearing more as we keep our young people safe.
So much, Amy. If you don't mind, I have a couple quick questions that I'd like to go over with you. So again, I'm sure that your book gets into this a lot more, and I'm sure, as you said, that you can expand upon this a lot more, in the facilitation of the actual program. But as a parent, I'm a parent myself. How my children are very young, so I do feel like this is a little bit ahead of me, but it's great to start thinking about it, I think, as early as possible. When exactly would you introduce these concepts? I mean, I have 6-year-old twins. I know that sexualization is happening younger and younger nowadays, and the exposure to sexual concepts are happening at extraordinarily young ages. How and when do you start talking to kids about these ideas?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say every child is different, and you as a parent will know as your children get older when they're ready. I would say certainly sometime in middle school. There are things happening in middle school that weren't happening when I was in middle school, that's for sure.
Sure.
So, I don't think that, given what we're hearing about, I mean, young men, for example, are starting to go on pornography as young as 10 years old. So, and that's becoming a little bit more the norm. So I would encourage you, it's very unsettling reading, but I don't know if you have girls or boys. But I would check out Peggy Orenstein's books. That will again, when you feel like the time is right. But certainly at around that middle school age bracket is when they're going to begin to perhaps have more exposure to things that you may have a little bit less control over. And it's a great opportunity to begin to create that discretionary thinking, so they can know, oh, actually it hurts my relationships with women if I go on pornography. And this is something that young men are talking about.
Mhm.
So, for example, there was an account in Orenstein's book around young men saying it's never enough. Their partners that they're having intimate relationships with, they're not able to feel sexually that it's ever enough because they've been so overstimulated by pornography that it's ruining relationships, it's ruining intimacy for young people. It's still a really hard force to break away from. So
Sure.
I think the younger you are in understanding the effects of it and having frank conversations at home around the effects of pornography, make it easier for young men to separate themselves out from that.
Yeah, and again, as you had mentioned, just the exposure to social media and things that they're seeing increasingly, just setting up expectations that are very, very false for what normal life is and what normal behavior is.
Right,
Yeah, they're just getting hit over the head with it.
right.
Um, so speaking of that, how can you approach these conversations? I'm going to go with the direction of music. How can you approach these conversations without offending your child's taste? So for instance, they happen to like a particular musician who happens to sing about certain things. You had said that, well, you don't have to miss out on the fun, but how do you do this without saying, no, you can't listen to that artist?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that is, kind of lands in the ballpark of parental discretion as far, and you have such little ones, so you'll want to protect them from that, I would say as long as you can until it starts to get introduced outside of the home. But I think, again, creating that conversation style where it's not about, you can't do this, or I'm never going to let you listen to music, because quite frankly, that's not really feasible. But to be able to say, well, what do you think about that lyric? Of slamming her against the wall and grabbing her by the throat, which is again stuff that they're seeing a lot in these videos, or in, pornography for sure. What do you think about that? And just creating a conversation, because what is happening there is you're helping them develop that executive functioning where they can have an objective conversation about something that's happening in the media. And you, of course, you have every right to share your own opinion. Well, this is how I feel about it as a woman. I think it's really insulting. I think that it's actually really damaging relationships. And if you want, I can tell you why I think that, and you could share some report, or again some statistics from a book like the book I mentioned. There's lots of that out there. It's very clear that the correlation between pornography use and unhealthy relationships is very obvious. So I think there's a way of talking about that, like almost journalistically, which it's interesting. That's how Peggy Orenstein did all of her interviews in Boys and Sex, is she just talked to them like a journalist, like, so this happened. What do you think about it? What would you want to do differently? What do you agree with? And just totally, objective conversation. That's a lot harder when we're talking about our own kids, but I think we can try. And I think we get a little bit farther if we can do that. So
It sounds like it really kind of leads them back to that common sense arena that you were talking about. Once you have these discussions, I think it may not become black and white, but I think the gray area, they start figuring out in the common sense arena, what
right,
is this really? Is this good or is this bad?
right.
Becomes a little more clear. I remember as a young adult when I first left the house and going out, for instance, dancing with my friends, I experienced things where, a guy would just come up and kiss me on the dance floor who I didn't even know. And I thought that was normal because I didn't have these experiences prior to this. And so I wouldn't really do anything about it. And I just remember, like you said, that feeling, that difference in the unwanted feeling this isn't right. And I would try talking to my friends about it, but like you said before, it was such a taboo topic, and they didn't really want to talk about it either. So I was really struck when you said that you mentioned earlier about the social groups navigating these experiences together and having these conversations together. Can you talk just a little bit more about that? Because I think that's a really kind of unique concept to get the gang all on board with this.
Right, right. So, so that we're talking about an age bracket, as we know, where there's a lot of self-absorption is very normal to young adulthood, and peer relationships are super important to young adults. And we know that as parents and as, you know, people who observe young people, their friendships are everything to them. So that's why in the book and the program, I try to use that as a supportive conversation point and a teaching tool, because there's a way that young people can use that inherent attachment to their friendships in a way that's empowering. So one of the things we talk about is having a pre-party plan. And I do this in every class when I do the program with young adults, is we talk about what's your pre-party plan, and I'll start with a question, which again is how we do a lot of the program, starting with a question. It's amazing how little they have pre-party plans. There's no like, what happens if somebody gets separated? What happens if somebody's flirting inappropriately with somebody in the group? Most young people do not have, especially at the high school level. In college, maybe a little bit more so. But in my experience thus far, there's not a lot of pre-party planning. So we begin to look at some steps that they can take with each other that don't force them to miss anything, but just ensure that they keep an eye on each other. They have a plan if somebody is in a risky situation. This is where, bystander intervention comes into play. What can the other friends do to help that person stay safe? We talk about secret signals that they could offer to each other. For example, using your analogy or your example of being on the dance floor and somebody coming over and doing something inappropriate, and I had the same experience when I was young and would go out dancing. What can that person do to signal to the group that they're uncomfortable? So we talk a lot about alcohol. Alcohol is one of the number one variables that affect assault outcomes. So how can young people enjoy alcohol, because most of them will at some point, but do it in a safe way? So, another part of pre-party planning could be make sure you eat something before you go out that night. Like basic stuff that we all learned inherently by the time we were in our mid to late 20s, we wouldn't even need to think about it. But young people are exposed to the same types of things, and yet that isn't something that they would normally think about. So it's really helping young people kind of keep each other safe, knowing where the exits are, knowing where you're going to meet up. I feel strongly that if somebody in the group wants to leave with a stranger, leave the party and go off with a guy that they're flirting with, for example, if we're talking about a group of young women, that the best protocol is to encourage them to make a plan with that individual at another time when they're sober, because there's too many things that can happen. And again, I've heard a lot of stories in my practice. Most of them involve alcohol and a group of friends out for an evening where one person gets separated and is off flirting with some guy, and everybody thinks they want to do that, and then an assault takes place. So it's they're very preventable methods that people can use. And at the same time, we know that there are assaults that are not preventable. So what we're doing in the program is we're trying to create an awareness of what the variables are that influence risk and how young people can respond to them in a mindful way that allows them to have fun but still stay safe. So.
Well, thank you so much, Amy. I really think that this book and this program are extraordinarily valuable, and I think it's something that all parents should read and all parents should learn about, because, as you said, it is such a difficult conversation to have, and as a young person, these are such confusing concepts to navigate. So thank you for the work that you've done in bringing help to the situation. And you know, I'm highly going to recommend this to various parents I know. So
Oh,
again,
thank you.
thank you so much. And once again, this program will be available on the Camden Public Library's YouTube channel. So if you think that you know someone who would appreciate it, you can certainly share this information and this link from them. Once again, Amy Carpenter's book is Be Strong, Be Wise, The Young Adult's Guide to Sexual Assault Awareness and Personal Safety. And Amy, this is available you could purchase it anywhere on Amazon.com and get it in libraries and such.
Yeah,
Yes.
if you go, you can get it on Amazon. If you go on my website, which is bestrongbewise.com, there's links to several different booksellers and you can get it there. And I'm happy to talk with anybody if they're interested in the program. They can find me at amy@bestrongbewise.
Super, thank you so much. And the Camden Public Library will be getting a copy as well. So.
Wonderful. Good.
All right. Thank you so much, Amy. And again, if you have any more books coming out, please contact us. And I would love to have you back. This has been a very interesting conversation.
Wonderful.
I wish you a wonderful evening. Thanks so much.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.